My husband and I have 5 kids, and our 2 youngest are autistic. And here are some differences between speech delay and autism in your child. Our son Ezra is 8 years old. He has level 3 autism, and he really likes cords and spinning with cords. And our son Simon is 3 years old, almost 4 years old, and he's been diagnosed with level 1 autism, no intellectual delay. And he loves cars. Of course, to know for sure if your child's autistic, please see a professional. There are 3 categories: repetitive and restrictive behaviors and interests, social, and communication. And every autistic person has issues in all 3 of these categories. So for example, if your child only has a speech delay and doesn't have autism, they are not going to have issues in repetitive and restrictive behaviors and interests. And they won't have issues in socializing. It'll just be that speech delay that they have a hard time with in the communication category. Most people who have a speech delay are not autistic, and there are even some autistic people who don't have speech delays. We'll go into those differences, and all the examples I'll be sharing are directly from our home to yours, from Simon and Ezra, my 2 boys. Is it important to diagnose early? If you think your answer is no, you might want to check out this video. Even though I already had Ezra and I knew that he was autistic, I saw Simon and I went, oh, they're so different from each other. And I was in denial even while sitting in the office during his assessment. And I remember telling the doctor, look, he's babbling. And the doctor said, yes, he is. But he's babbling to himself. He's not trying to communicate with those words and babble sounds that he has. And I remember sitting there watching Simon in kind of a new light, understanding a little bit more. And I realized that at such a young age, Simon used words, but never used them to communicate. That is not speech delay. That's something else. And it could be autism. It could be apraxia of speech. It could be selective mutism. It could be lots of things. We won't go into that. I actually heard my son Simon at 1.5 years old say, oh, green car. And I was completely shocked. I wasn't really sure if I heard what I thought I'd heard. And I went closer to him and he's like, green car, car's green. This is so weird that that's the first time I've heard him say a word. And even a year later, when he was 2.5 years old, he was still having a hard time calling me mama or using any of his words that he used while he was playing to communicate anything to me. If he needed something or wanted something from me, he would just kind of cry and whine to get it. And I tried everything in my parenting book. I'd had 4 children before, and I just couldn't get him to speak to me. After just a few months of speech therapy, Simon improved a ton. He's still in speech therapy, and he's able to talk a lot more now. I was surprised at the realization that my son Simon was completely content with not being understood. Now, this doesn't mean that every autistic child is going to be content with not being understood. That is definitely a sign that your child does not have just a speech delay. There is something more going on. And we found out later that Simon has autism level 1. The doctor explained to me in that session something I never even considered. That a neurotypical child who has a speech delay, has a hard time communicating, will try and get your attention, will try and look you in the eye. They will be grunting and making noises, and they'll be pointing and using gestures, and they'll be seeking confirmation that they have your attention. They'll be looking you in the eye, trying to get your attention, close to your face, sometimes even putting their hands next to your face, like, come on. That is a neurotypical way for a child who has a hard time speaking to get your attention. My son Ezra, who has more severe autism, level 3, and if you don't know about the levels, you can check out this video here. We actually talked to a doctor who explains it all really well. When Ezra wants my attention, he will come to me and grab my hand and take me to whatever it is that he wants without trying to get my attention. He just grabs my hand, drags my hand over to what he wants, and then it's like that. He doesn't try to point. He doesn't try and do gestures, or he doesn't wait till he knows he's got my attention. He just acts, gets my hands and puts it next to whatever he wants, right? Ezra had a near-death experience when he was really young. And after that, it kind of changed us a little bit, a lot actually. My husband quit his job, we sold our home, and we moved into an RV and traveled to all the national parks. with 5 kids in an RV. We knew at that time that Ezra was autistic, and a lot of times he would just get into things without asking and make messes. So I would store a lot of the things in the RV up high. So whenever he saw something that he wanted, like whether it was his toy or his coloring book or iPad or a cookie, he would take my hand and just throw it towards whatever it was, because I had to keep things high and out of his reach in the RV, because, you know, in the RV you don't really have a lot of space. And so that's where we stored a lot of things. And I just remember day in and day out, he would just be throwing my hand different places. And, you know, it worked for a while. We are progressing though in his communication, and he's learning how to use an iPad, an ACC device, so that he can communicate by pointing at pictures, and he's even learning how to spell. So we're really excited about the progress that Ezra's making, and we continually share about his progress and Simon's and our family's unique normal of having 5 kids and 2 on the spectrum. So please consider subscribing. There are people out there who will just jump to conclusions. If they see a child grabbing someone's hand and not pointing, they just think, oh, they're autistic. But there are other things that you need to look for. Are they looking you in the eye? Are they using gestures? Are they trying to make other sounds and trying to communicate with you while looking you in the face? Are they trying to get your attention and affirmation that they have your attention? That one's huge. Those types of things are signs that your child's actually not autistic. They just have some kind of speech delay, or maybe it's something else. And of course, to find out any diagnosis, please see a professional. If your child stims a lot, and I mean all the time, for long periods of time and very repetitively, at least once a day, probably more times a day, then that's a sign that your child doesn't just have a speech delay, but that it might be autism. If you want to know what stimming is, it's a self-stimulatory behavior that's really repetitive, and sometimes it's really obvious and sometimes it's not. Sometimes stimming actually can be completely a mind game. We talk a lot about this in our ASD club, where we join weekly on video calls. Click the link below in the description, and we can't wait to see you on the next call. If you're looking for some more one-on-one coaching, we have that as well in the link below in the description. If your child or a child in your classroom is having a really hard time understanding social cues, in addition to their difficulty with speech, that's also a sign that it's probably not just a speech delay, but it could also be autism. Remember that autism is a spectrum, so every autistic child is going to look different. They're going to react different to different things. Now, here's a tricky one, so listen close. If your child has a speech delay, whether in your class or when you're taking care of, or it's your own child in your home, but then you also see an additional anxiety with social situations, it could be still that they just have anxiety because they are unsure about what to say because they have a speech delay, right? So what I would suggest is find out why they have anxiety with social situations. Is it simply because they're nervous because of their speech delay? Or is it something else? Is that anxiety with social situations coming from not knowing what to say because they don't understand social cues? That could be autism. Do you see your child trying to mimic and copy other people? And that's a sign that they're trying to mask autistic traits, which is a sign of autism. And if you don't know what masking or camouflaging is, there's a video right here about masking. It's a coping mechanism, but it's kind of the worst and can really, really hurt your child. So if you have an autistic child and maybe you're just beginning this journey, I would really recommend you find out what masking really is so you can help your child bring down their anxiety. You don't have to put that pressure on them. They can have a part of their life at home with their family where they can just be confident in who they are, and they don't have to feel like they have to mask their autistic traits all the time. In my opinion, as a mom of 2 kids on the spectrum, masking can be extremely dangerous, especially if people feel like that's the only way they're going to be accepted and loved, which shouldn't be true. It just shouldn't. Children should feel unconditionally loved. What do you think about masking? Do you think that parents and teachers should just expect autistic children to camouflage and mask their autistic traits? Or do you think we should encourage them to be themselves and the best version of themselves and be proud of their autism and not shame it? What do you think? Put it down in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion. Okay, that was my tangent. Back to, what's this video about? Oh yeah, speech delay. Another sign to look for that is really important as a parent and a teacher or a caregiver is to look for sensory processing issues. Does your child at home or in your class have sensory sensitivity? If the child's seeking sensory input constantly, like banging their head on things or pushing things and punching things all the time, or maybe biting things, then that's a sign of seeking sensory input. Maybe what they're feeling is understimulation. That is incredibly uncomfortable, to be understimulated. My son Ezra is very understimulated and he loves deep compressions. While we're at church, I know church is a hard place for little kids, whether autistic or not, because you have to be quiet for a full hour and sometimes it's just hard to listen that long. But we did a whole video about taking our autistic kids to church right here if you're interested. One thing that I will do with Ezra to help calm him down, and he does really like it usually, is I'll start massaging his arm and I'll just give him some sensory input, and I can tell it's working because he'll like all of a sudden just kind of like go limp, like he'll just feel more relaxed and more grounded because I give him that like hard pressure and that sensory input. Ezra loves going to the doors at church and slamming them open and shut. And I think he likes it because of the sound it makes, but I also think he likes it because of the deep pressure work that it takes to open the really heavy doors. And so I think that's super fascinating. And if your child has a speech delay and they're acting like that, searching for input, or they're trying to escape sensory overload, then you might look into getting an autism assessment. The most common comment on our channel is this one: my child might be autistic. What should I do? Sometimes they tell me like what their concerns are. Sometimes the parent talks about the different signs that they've seen. And I say the same thing with everyone. Put your child on the waiting list. The waiting list is going to be long, sometimes years long, depending on where you live. And you have all that time to talk to your pediatrician, to voice your concerns to many different professionals. And if you change your mind and you think, no, there's no way they're autistic, you can always take them off the waiting list. But if you spend a year in denial going back and forth, oh, I don't know, and then put them on the waiting list, and then you have to wait another year, then that's just more time of not having the services that could really benefit your child. If you want some tips to help your autistic child communicate, you can see that video here, and our autism playlist is here. Remember, if you have an autistic child, you're in good company.